course, in the land of Al-Andalus, which is frequently flagged up to us, not always by Muslims, as an example of the way forward for Muslims in the West, Muslims in Europe, Muslims in the modern world. And perhaps we can spare a thought for those debates as we enjoy ourselves, relax, learn, work, pray here. Muslim Andalusia really had nothing to do with Europe as we understand it. Remember that Europe was something that the Romans didn't know anything about. It was a category that really was invented, you could say, by the Muslims. The Roman Empire was a Mediterranean reality. The Romans were just as much at home in North Africa and the Near East, Palestine, Asia Minor, Egypt, as they were in places like Spain, Gaul, Italy, Dacia, the frontiers of Germany, England, and so forth. Europe is a more recent notion. The name itself comes from Europa, maiden, originally from Phoenicia, Lebanon today, who was one of those many maidens who, according to a favourite theme in Greek mythology, was ravished by Zeus and carried away. And she gave her name to this continent, which is where her descendants ended up. But when we speak of Europe today, and we try and figure out our identity as not just Muslims in Europe, practicing an Islam in Europe, but as European Muslims in some necessarily badly defined hyphenated sense, and as practitioners of a European strand of Islam, we don't really find much comfort in legends of antiquity. And we remember our ambiguous situation as heirs to the biggest single rupture in the history of the continent, which in fact gave birth to, for instance, the curious map on the euro banknotes. When they were designing those notes, what unifying theme could they find? What is Europe? What is European identity? Cynically, one could say Europe is characterized by a larger amount of infighting than any other continent. Within living memory, First and Second World War, the worst conflicts on the planet were essentially European in terms of the ideologies that inspired them and their key protagonists. So what is Europe as an entity? Well, according to many historians, Europe comes into being precisely at the moment when Islam comes into being. Islam does this extraordinary and unpredictable, unpredicted thing of suddenly coming from nowhere, gobbling up 2/3 of the Roman Imperium, North Africa, Egypt, and the Near East, slowly making its way into Asia Minor and making its way into Spain as well. So that the Mediterranean becomes not quite a Muslim lake, but almost, especially when places like Corsica and Sicily accede to Islam. Muslim settlements on the south coast of France, fortresses built by Muslims all the way along the coast of southern Italy, and so on. We nearly got there. But Europe as such, the European idea, comes about as a resistance to that. The last little bits of the barbarian kingdoms. The Visigoths here were defeated, converted to Islam. But Don Pelayo, in his cave in the north of Spain, who began the project of reconquest, Charlemagne and the Franks, the Germanic barbarian heirs to the Roman Empire in the west, they were the kernel of what then expanded to become Europe, and then effectively expanded to become the world. The world is a set of variations on what Europe became. And if you go to Seville and go to the cathedral there, which of course was once the mosque of Ishbiliya, the mosque where Ibn Khaldun's ancestors learnt their Quran, you'll see that there's the tomb of Christopher Columbus. And the whole tomb is set up as a symbol of the triumph of Europe and Christendom over Islam. There's all kinds of crescents being trampled, and the pomegranate, which is the symbol of Granada, being impaled on a spear. The final trumping of Islam was the crossing of the Atlantic in order to expand Europeanness into the New World and beyond. And then the Portuguese went around the Cape, established themselves in Goa, East Africa, and further east in order to outflank the Muslims and to Europeanize everyone. So a small culture that became a kind of remnant, an area in muddy northern forests where Muslims didn't bother to go, suddenly expanded to become a global culture with which we need to engage. So when we think about European Islam, we think about Muslims in Spain, Muslims in the Balkans, places where the continent has engaged with the religion. But the culture here was not, under Muslim auspices, European in that revanchist and ultimately globalizing sense. The culture here was Romance-speaking, Berber-speaking, Arabic-speaking, pluralistic, diverse. Cordoba was, unlike European cities, gigantically diverse. It had its Slavic sector, it had its Germanic aristocracy, it had settlements of Scandinavian Muslims nearby, it had Africans, it had Arabs, it had Berber nomads in the Sierra nearby. It was, as one expected from traditional Muslim cities, immensely plural, which is not the European model, which is not the papal model, which is not the model of cuius regio eius religio, which is the slogan of traditional Europe. As the king is, so shall be the religion of the subjects. So when we speak about our current paradoxical situation, which is that we are required to be an integrated and integrative component, the largest significant component, in the reluctant pluralism of contemporary European society, we find that we represent a principle that is already the only genuinely pluralistic principle that the continent has known since the decline of the Roman Imperium. The Romans certainly allowed religious, ethnic plurality in a way that Western Christendom could not. That's the paradox of our situation. We are asked to be part of a new multi-ethnic, multicultural reality in that corner of the world that existed to resist the new ecumenical, diverse world of Islam, and historically was more given to producing nationalisms, ethnocentrisms, crusades, inquisitions, impositions of uniformity than anywhere else. Cordoba, as a Muslim city, was endlessly, confusingly diverse, and sustainably so, and Muslims weren't worried by that or thought that that was something that the government should do something about. This is from the اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم that the Quran commends. The two scriptures, the two narratives of the rival civilizations, the Bible and the Quran, take diametrically opposed views of the value of human difference. The great story of human difference in the Bible is the Tower of Babel. Difference of human languages is unambiguously presented as a divine punishment, as a curse, the curse of Babel. We can't understand each other any longer. In the Quran, the invocation of the difference of human colours and languages is in one of those long sequences of the ayat. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and of his signs is اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم, the difference of your tongues and colours. So it's no coincidence that Muslim Cordoba was diverse, because it was inspired by the Quran, which asked us to celebrate what nowadays we rather unambitiously call multi-culturalism. But Christian Cordoba was the opposite of that. Andalusia is a kind of icon of everything that the modern secular discourse in the West can't be comfortable with and wishes was the other way around. They wish that theirs was the tolerant civilization with deep-rooted traditions of diversity, but that's not the case. Christian Cordoba was a capital of the Inquisition. Christian Cordoba was the city where, until 200 years ago, everybody had to keep their front doors open Friday lunchtime, just in case somebody was secretly praying at that time. The public baths were closed down, and to be caught performing ritual ablutions the Jewish way or the Muslim way would automatically result in conviction by the Inquisition, a sentence, if you were lucky, to 10 years in the galleys, if you were unlucky, to be burnt in a kind of public macabre celebration to which everybody was invited. The idea of limpieza de sangre, cleanness of blood, would have been totally foreign to the Romans, who didn't care if emperors were Arab or African or Illyrian. Ethnicity really didn't mean much to the Romans. But with this growth of the European principle, which originates in the Germanic tribalism, you have this idea of cleanness of blood, limpieza de sangre. And Rosenberg, who was one of the great Nazi theorists, said that one of his great inspirations was the Inquisition itself. Because they weren't just interested in your religious correctness, they were very interested in the racial purity of our ancestors. So the law was, if you wanted to get on the galleon and make your fortune in the New World, the only place you could do so was the quay at Cadiz, where you had to prove documentation that you hadn't had a Muslim or a Jewish ancestor 10 generations back. Otherwise you wouldn't be allowed on the ship, because they were so afraid that there might be racial or religious impurity in the New World. And the Inquisition was there as well. The Inquisition records indicate that in Cuzco, in Peru for instance, in the 17th century, they found people who were secretly practicing Islam, and there were 3 public burnings in Peru of secret Muslims, people who tried to escape from the horror of the Inquisition here, hoping that in the New World there would be more space and they wouldn't be noticed. That's the beginning of modern totalitarianism. It begins with the vicious European determination to extirpate difference, and specifically Muslim difference, but also Jewish difference. So this land is a kind of icon of 2 different worldviews, and one that we need to bear in mind when we are bullied with the rhetoric of modern European integration. Be open, liberal, pluralistic, accepting of diversity like ourselves. Respect the other the way we do. Don't be narrow, fundamentalist, ethnocentric. That's not what we are anyway. That's what they have been historically. And what many of them were trying to do until living memory. Franco died only in 1975. That's when you could start to have synagogues and mosques again in Spain. That's not so long ago. So that's something that we need to bear in mind, that this place here is of kind of meta-historical significance. The mountain behind us was home to a watchtower on the boundaries of the Kingdom of Granada with the Kingdom of Castile to the north. This was the last bit of free Islam in southern Spain, so that if they saw the Christians coming, they would light a fire on the watchtower and the hill, and it was like the Lord of the Rings. In 3 hours in Morocco, they would know that the Christians were coming. This was the boundary between the celebration of difference and, on the other hand, the desire to impose sameness.